Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
People, my Torah. Incline your ears to the utterances of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a proverb. I will declare riddles from ancient times, which we have heard and known, and which our fathers told to us. We will not hide it from their sons, recounting the psalms of the Lord to a later generation, and his might and the wonders that he performed. And he established a witness among those of the house of Jacob, and he decreed a Torah among those of the house of Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their sons, so that another generation, sons still to be born, should know. They will arise and tell it to their children, and they will place their hope in God and not forget the works of God, and they will keep his commandments, and they will not be like their fathers, a stubborn and vexing generation, a generation whose heart was not firm with its Lord, and its spirit was not faithful to God. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia, and I hope that you are enjoying your Sabbath of unleavened bread. Tonight is the full moon Sabbath, and last night was the Passover, the eve of the full moon, which we covered in last week's show. On the Passover, I shared a passage with you from the book of Ezekiel, the tragedian, and it has a connection and declares how the full moon is connected to the Passover, the eve of Passover, and also to the Sabbath of unleavened bread. It says, "This month shall be the first month of your year, in which I'll lead you to another land, which to the Hebrew fathers I did swear, and say to all the peoples, in this month, on full moon's eve, the paschal sacrifice to God present, and touch the doors with blood, which sign the fearsome angel shall pass by." And so, those of you that did acknowledge and observe the Levitical feast day, Passover on the eve of the full moon, which was last night, because the waxing crescent was sighted in the western skies on the 25th of April, which was a Wednesday. And because of that, the Sabbaths are aligned to the Wednesdays and also to the quarterly phases. And so you have the first quarter Sabbath, which was the um, week before this evening. We have the full moon Sabbath tonight. We'll have the third quarter Sabbath next Wednesday, and then the lunar conjunctive Sabbath the following week thereafter. But did want to let people know that we have released also the 2020 Enochian seasonal lunar solar calendar. And for the first time, we've also tried a premium version, which is a extra large calendar. I did not make that one available previously because it was so expensive to produce, but a lot of people are enjoying and like to have a print copy of the calendar, and so we thought, why not? When it's the same work to create the smaller as well as the larger version. I mean, not much more work. And so we did try that. And for those of you that don't want to have or purchase a print copy, we do make it available on a month by month basis at the sacredwordpublishing.com website in the Enochian calendar section. And so you can follow along with that calendar. I personally do recommend that people try to look at it every day, because in doing so, you will become familiar with the way that God has established his calendar setup according to and beginning with spring, the month of Abib, which Abib means green ears, or also known as the month of Nisan, which is the word for miracle, and also of blooming. And so those calendars, when you look at them like you would any other calendar, like the regular Gregorian pagan calendar, and just observing the day as it changes, you'll get to learn the Hebrew months, um, and how, uh, and then again, beginning with this calendar, the seasonal, it begins with spring, the month of Nisan, which is the first month of the Hebrew year. Um, then you have Ayar and Sivan and Av, and Tammuz, and I may get this wrong, Elui, and then Tishri, and so on and so forth. But um, just so again, so you can become familiar, and then watching and looking at the calendar, you'll see how the phases of the moon are also what determines the Rosh Chodesh, the appearance of the waxing crescent, is what determines the Sabbath. And then you have, accordingly, with each Rosh Chodesh, which is the first day of the lunar month, then you have the following 4 sabbatical weeks aligned with the septennial phases of the moon, which is every 7 days. And so, and I know for a lot of people, they say, oh, this is so difficult. Why would God make it so difficult or confusing, when in actuality, it's not at all. And in fact, it is the most simplistic and um, easy calendar to follow, because all you're doing, and this is, again, before there was an actual written down or print calendar, and everybody that was alive, they looked to the heavens for the determination of what day, they in what month and what season. It was all determined by the cycles of the luminaries as they moved, um, in circularity around Polaris, the one fixed star of the celestial night. And so, becoming used to and being a witness to the moon every night, you can see how its appearance again starts the lunar month, and then also the year, because God has amazingly established that the moon tilts over the course of the year, so that when the month of Nisan is occurring, you see the first appearance of the waxing crescent as a smiley face, and then it begins to tilt, uh, until it um, is like um, a sliver, a sideways sliver, like we see the crescent moon, and then it will come back down in the opposite way. And so, very interesting the way that God has established it to be a witness in the heavens, and that one can look to it every night of the year for determination as to where we are in not only the days, but also the weeks, and then also the months. And so fantastic, and really, again, easy once you become familiar with the way that it is visible all throughout the year in the skies. And so this evening, I wanted to recount a little bit of the story of Passover, but from a different source, and one that would give you a little bit more insight. And I'm also going to tie it to the book that I just released, the Light Vestures and the Rod of Wonder, and it's to bring forth in more elaboration the story of Passover, and the more the more unfamiliar portions and aspects of it. And then tomorrow night on Secrets Revealed, I'm going to share with you the Colburn Bible story of Passover, and how it is from the perspective of the Egyptians and what they went through. Because the Colburn Bible does preserve the account of not only uh, the Egyptian wise men, the magicians, and the story of that pagan side of it, but also the Celtic druids, which they did and had connection with the sons of Isaac, called the Saxons. And so it will be an interesting story. And it was one that, when I was talking about the destroyer, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 months back, I'm not sure how long it was now, I was never able to finish that story anyways. And so it'll give me the opportunity to share with you the rest of the story of the Passover from the account of the Colburn Bible, which, for those that have not read or examined or looked at the Colburn in any way, it's a very interesting um, source, ancient account, and ancient source, and goes into a lot with regard to ancient accounts, ancient stories, which we are not familiar with. And a lot of insight can be gleaned, because it also covers some aspects which are kind of glazed over or quickly gleaned over within the scriptures. Like, for instance, the possibility of the Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 1, and chapter 1, verse 2, the earth, the war in heaven, which led to the earth becoming without form and void, that it became a deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin. And so there was something, most certainly an occurrence. And we know that, in other accounts, it was said that Lucifer had rebelled against the Most High God, and that he was jealous of Christ, the Son of God, and that his jealousy led to iniquity being found within him, his want to be like the Most High and to overthrow Yahushua as the Word, as the Son. That is what then led to the 1/3 of the angels of the Most High joining him in rebellion. And that we see in the scriptures that Christ alludes to a time in sometime in our very ancient past, which most, none of us are familiar or mostly unfamiliar. And he says that he had seen Satan like lightning fall from the heavens. And so, again, this is something that is not spoken about in greater detail. And it's also something that I personally tie to the distinction with regard to election and how that applies to the circumstances of our birth and our embodiment within this world and within um, physical incarnation. And so that, again, the Colburn Bible does have an entire section of several pages where it speaks about the destruction and the recreation of the earth. And it specifies and talks about a time when, things were different, and goes into the changes that occurred. And so, uh, interesting consideration. All right, so I'm going to start with a passage from the Perk de Rabbi Eliezer that gives you an idea on the pre-mundane creation. It says, 8 things were created on the second day, namely the well, the manna, the rod, the rainbow, the art of writing, the written characters, the garments, and the destroying spirits. 10 things arose in the thought of the Creator, namely Jerusalem, the spirits of the patriarchs, the paths of the righteous, Gehenna, the waters of the flood, the second tables of the law, the Sabbath, the temple, the ark, and the light of the world to come. And so you see mentioned in this particular passage 3 things that I have spoken of in this 5-part series on the prophecy of the 10 kings. And when I've talked about the different episodes that make up the story of the rod and the garments of power. And that I covered in great detail the well, Miriam's well, which is what is alluded to, and which unified the love affairs, the star-crossed passage of both. Well, we know that Eliezer was sent by Abraham to um, bring back what was Rebecca. And then Jacob, when he went down to the well, he met there for the first time Rachel, the mother of his, what are his 2 favorite sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And then we have later, in the time prior to the Exodus, that Moshe meets at the same well Zipporah, and taking her as wife, she saves his life twice, in fact, and then prophetically fulfills the specifics which led to Moshe's ability to draw the staff from the ground, that, like Excalibur in the story of King Arthur, that only Moses was able to pull the staff from the ground, and that's what gave Ruel or Jethro, as most people know him, Ruel, the advisor for Pharaoh, um, gave him indication that this was the one that he had waited for, that he had known prophetically that this individual coming and actually removing the staff from his guarding and presenting it to him, that he would be the one to not only marry Zipporah, but also to lead the Israelites and to free them from their bondage as indentured servants to the Egyptians, which is exactly what happened. And it was with Moshe that these items were again, um, the the rod of wonder together with these sacred garments, that they were brought back in possession and passed down in heritage. And when I go into the story of some of the details surrounding the Exodus and the Passover, that you'll see, in my opinion, or at least I'll present some evidence for your consideration as to which brings forth the possibility that Moshe was in possession of the garments of power because of the way that the animal guardians that Pharaoh had, walking the halls of his court, the way that they acted in response to Moses seems to indicate that he did have such power over them. All right, and so let me find. We'll start with where and how Moshe met Yahweh, or Yod Vahe Yahuwah, Jehovah, Yahweh, God. It says this: the fifth descent was when he came down to the thorn bush, as it is said, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. He abandoned the entire mountain and descended into the thorn bush, and he abode therein. And the thorn bush was an emblem of grief and distress, and it was full of thorns and thistles. Why did he abide in the midst of the thorn bush, which was an emblem of grief and distress? Because he saw Israel in great grief, and he also dwelt with them, thus fulfilling that which is said, in all affliction he was afflicted. Rabbi Levi said, that rod which was created in the twilight was delivered to the first man out of the Garden of Eden. Adam delivered it to Enoch, and Enoch delivered it to Noah, and Noah handed it on to Shem. Shem passed it on to Abraham. Abraham transmitted it to Isaac, and Isaac gave it over to Jacob. And Jacob brought it down into Egypt and passed it on to his son Joseph. And when Joseph died, and they pillaged his household goods, it was placed in the palace of Pharaoh. And Jethro was one of the magicians of Egypt, and he saw the rod and the letters which were upon it, and he desired in his heart to have it. And he took it and brought it and planted it in the midst of the garden of his house. No one was able to approach it any more. And when Moses came to his house, he went into the garden of Jethro's house and saw the rod and read the letters which were upon it. And he put forth his hand and took it. Jethro watched Moses and said, this one in the future will redeem Israel from Egypt. Therefore, he gave him Zipporah, his daughter, to wife, and it is said, and Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah, his daughter. That's Exodus chapter 2, verse 21. Moses was keeping the sheep of Jethro for 40 years, and the beasts of the field did not consume them, but they increased and multiplied exceedingly. And concerning them, the scripture saith, as the flock of holy things. And he led the flock until he came to Horeb. As it is said, and he led the flock to the back of the wilderness, and came to the mountain of God unto Horeb. Exodus 3, verse 1. There the Holy One, blessed be he, was revealed unto him from the midst of the thorn bush. Moses saw the bush burning with fire, and the fire did not consume the bush, and the bush did not extinguish the flames of fire. And now the bush does not grow in the earth unless it has water beneath it. Moses saw and was wondering very much in his heart, and he said, what kind of glory is there in this midst? He said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the thorn bush is not burnt. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, Moses, stand where thou art standing, for there in the future will I give the Torah to Israel, as it is said. And he said, draw not nigh hither. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, go. Hence the sages said, anyone who enters the temple must remove his shoe, for thus spake the Holy One, blessed be he, to Moses, put off thy shoes from off thy feet. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, come and I will send thee unto Pharaoh. He answered before him, sovereign of all worlds, have I not spoken thus to thee 3 or 4 times that I have no power, for I have a defective tongue? As it is said, and Moses said unto the Lord, O Lord, I am not eloquent. Not only this, but moreover, thou dost send me into the power of my enemy who seeks my hurt. For this reason I fled from him. As it is said, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh. He answered him, do not fear him, for all the men who sought thy life are already dead. Were they dead? Were they not alive? Only they had diminished their wealth. Hence thou mayest learn that all who lose their wealth are as though they were dead. Therefore it is said, for all the men are dead who sought thy life. God said to him, come, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh. He replied to him, sovereign of all the worlds, send by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. That is to say, by the hand of that man whom thou wilt send in the future. He said to him, I have not said, come and I will send thee to Israel, but come and I will send thee unto Pharaoh. And as for that man of whom thou sayest that I should send him to Israel in the future, that is to come, so it is said, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and terrible day of the Lord come, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers. Moses spake before him, sovereign of all the worlds, give me a wonder or a sign. He said to him, cast thy staff to the ground. He cast his staff to the ground, and it became a fiery serpent. Why did the Holy One, blessed be he, show unto Moses a sign with a fiery serpent? And why did he not show it to him with something else? But just as the serpent bites and kills the sons of man, likewise Pharaoh and his people bit and slew the Israelites. Afterwards it became again like a dry stick. Thus he spake, likewise Pharaoh and his people shall become like this dry stick, as it is said. And the Lord said unto Moses, put forth thine hand and take it by the tail. He spake before him, sovereign of all the worlds, give me a wonder. He said to him, put now thine hand into thy bosom. He put his hand into his bosom. He brought it out leprous, like snow. Why did the Holy One, blessed be he, show into Moses a sign by means of an unclean thing? And why did he not show it by means of a clean thing? But just as the leper is unclean and causes uncleanliness, likewise Pharaoh and his people were unclean, and they caused Israel to be unclean. Afterwards Moses became clean again, and he spoke to him, likewise shall Israel become clean from the uncleanness of the Egyptians, as it is said. And he said, put now thine hand into thy bosom. Why did he show unto Moses the fire in the midst of the thorn bush? But the fire refers to Israel, who are compared to fire, as it is said, and the house of Jacob shall be a fire. Obadiah 18. The thorn bush refers to the nations of the world, who are compared to thorns and thistles. He said to him, likewise shall Israel be in the midst of the nations. The fire of Israel shall not consume the nations who are compared to thorns and thistles, but the nations of the world shall extinguish the flames of Israel. These flames are the words of the Torah. But in the future that is to come, the fire of Israel will consume all the nations who are compared to thorns and thistles. As it is said, and the people shall be as the burnings of lime. Isaiah 33, verse 12. Moses said before the Holy One, blessed be he, sovereign of all the worlds, make known to me thy great and holy name, that I may call on thee by thy name, and thou wilt answer me, as it is said. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. Exodus 3:14. And God further said to Moses, the angel saw that the Holy One, blessed be he, had transmitted the secret of the ineffable name to Moses, and they rejoined, blessed art thou, O Lord, who graciously bestoweth knowledge. All right, that was from the Perk de Rabbi Eleazar. And now I'm going to present to you a little bit more detail on the same kind of story, but this will be from the Legends of the Jews. And it's again about Moses' commission. And then we're going to go into his dealings with Pharaoh. One day that Moses was keeping sheep, his father-in-law Jethro came to him and demanded back the staff that he had given him. And then Moses cast the staff from him among a number of other rods. But the staff ever returned to his hand as often as he cast it away. And then Jethro laid hold of the rod, but he could not move it. Therefore he was obliged to let Moses retain it. But he was estranged from him. Now Pharaoh was dead, and when the news reached Moses in Midian, he gat him up and set his wife Zipporah and his sons Gershom on an ass and took the way of Egypt. And as they were in the way, they halted at a certain place, and it was cloudy and cold and rainy. And then they encamped, and Zipporah tried to make a fire, but could not, for the wood was damp. Moses said, I see a fire burning at the foot of the mountain. I will go to it, for there must be travelers there, and I will fetch a brand away, and will kindle a fire, and be warm. Then he took his rod in his hand, and went. But when he came near the spot, he saw that the fire was not on the ground, but at the summit of a tree. And the tree was a thorn. A thorn tree was the first tree that grew when God created the herb of the field and the trees of the forest. Moses was filled with fear, and he would have turned and fled, but a voice called to him out of the fire, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. And the voice said again, Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. This was the reason why he was bidden put off his shoes. They were made of ass's hide, and Moses had trodden on the dung of his ass as he followed Zipporah and Gershom. And then God gave Moses his commission to go into Egypt and release his captive people. But Moses feared and said, I am of slow lips and tongue, for he had burnt them with his finger when he took the live coal before Pharaoh, as already related. But God said to him, I have given thee Aaron thy brother to speak for thee. And now, what is this that thou hast in thy hand? Moses answered, This is my rod. And to what purpose dost thou turn it? I lean on it when I am walking, and when I come where there is no grass, I strike the trees therewith and bring down the leaves to feed my sheep withal. And when he had narrated all the uses to which he put the staff, God said to him, With this staff shalt thou prevail against Pharaoh. Cast it upon the ground. And when he cast it down, it was transformed into a serpent or a dragon. And Moses turned his back to run from it. But God said, Fear not, take it up by the neck. And he caught it, and it became a rod in his hands. Then said the Most Holy, Put thy hand into thy bosom. And he did so, and drew it forth, and it was white and shining like the moon in the dark of night. Then Moses desired to go back to Zipporah his wife. But the angel Gabriel retained him, saying, Thou hast higher duties to perform than to attend to thy wife. Lo, I have already recommended her to her father's house. Go on upon thy way to Pharaoh, as the Lord hath commanded thee. The night on which Moses entered Egyptian territory, an angel appeared to Aaron in a dream with a crystal glass full of good wine in his hand, and said as he extended it to him, Aaron, drink of this wine which the Lord sends thee, as a pledge of good news. Thy brother Moses has returned to Egypt, and God has chosen him to be his prophet, and thee to be his spokesman. Arise and go forth to meet him. Aaron therefore arose from his bed and went out of the city to the banks of the Nile, but there was no boat there by which he could cross. Suddenly he perceived in the distance a light which approached, and as it drew near, he saw it was a horseman. It was Gabriel, mounted on a steed of fire which shone like the brightest diamond, and whose neighing was hymns of praise, for the steed was one of the cherubim. Aaron at first supposed that he was pursued by one of Pharaoh's horsemen, and he would have cast himself into the Nile. But Gabriel stayed him, declared who he was, mounted him on the fiery cherub, and they crossed the Nile on his back. There stood Moses, who, when he saw Aaron, exclaimed, Truth is come, falsehood is past. Now this was the sign that God had given to Moses. Behold, he cometh to meet thee, and they rejoiced over each other. But another account is this: Moses entered Memphis with his sheep during the night, and now Amram was dead, but his wife Jochebed was alive. And when Moses reached the door, Jochebed was awake. He knocked at the door, and then she opened, but knew him not, and asked, "Who art thou?" He answered, "I am a man from a far country. I pray thee, lodge me, and give me to eat this night." She took him in and brought him some meat and said to Aaron, "Sit down and eat with the guest to do him honor." Aaron, in eating, conversed with Moses and recognized him. And then the mother and sister knew him also. And when the meal was over, Moses acquitted himself of his mission to Aaron, and Aaron answered, "I will obey the will of God." Moses spent the night and the whole of the following day in relating to his mother the things that had befallen him. And on the second night, Moses and Aaron went forth to Pharaoh's palace. I said that this was from the Legends of the Jews, but it is actually from the Legends of the Patriarchs and the Prophets. Now, this next story goes into my belief of how Moses was also in possession of the garments of power and not just the staff of God. And when you hear this account, I think you'll understand why. But I will point out in emphasis why it is that I believe this to be the truth. And so this is where they confront Pharaoh. Now the palace had 400 doors, 100 on each side, and each door was guarded by 60,000 fighting men. The angel Gabriel came to them and led them into the palace, but not by the doors. When they appeared before Pharaoh, they said, "God hath sent us unto thee, to bid thee let the Hebrews go, that they may hold a feast in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." Tabari tells a different story. Moses and Aaron sought admittance during 2 years, and now Pharaoh gave himself out to be a god. But Moses and Aaron, when they spake at the door with the porters, said, "He is no god." One day the jester of Pharaoh heard his master read the history of his own life, and when he came to the passage which asserted he was a god, the jester exclaimed, "Now this is strange. For 2 years there have been two strangers at that gate denying thy divinity." And when Pharaoh heard this, he was in a fury, and he sent and had Moses and Aaron brought before him. But to return to the rabbinic tale, Moses and Aaron were driven out from the presence of Pharaoh. And they said, "Who admitted these men?" And some of the porters he slew, and some he scourged. Then 2 lionesses were placed before the palace to protect it, and the beasts suffered no man to enter, unless Pharaoh gave the word. And the Lord spake to Moses and Aaron, saying, "When Pharaoh talketh with you, saying, Give us a miracle, thou shalt say to Aaron, Take thy rod and cast it down, and it shall become a basilisk, a serpent. For all the inhabitants of the earth shall hear the voice of the shriek of Egypt when I destroy it. As all creatures heard the shriek of the serpent when I stripped it and took from it its legs and made it lick the dust after the fall." On the morrow, Moses and Aaron came again to the king's palace, and the lionesses would have devoured them. Then Moses raised his staff, and their chains brake, and they followed him, barking like dogs, into the house. There's more, but you'll see that unusually the animals um, lean and are favorable to both Moses and Aaron. When Moses and Aaron stood before the king, Aaron cast down the rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent which opened its jaws, and it laid one jaw beneath the throne, and its upper jaw was over the canopy above it. Now, imagine how big this basilisk, this dragon was, that when it opened its jaws, it fully could consume the throne of Pharaoh easily. And so, not a simple snake. And this is something that we don't get in a lot of the other stories, but you'll see that the size of the dragon that is called forth, it's a monster. It really is a monster. And that's why, Moses ran from it when he first and initially saw it. Then the servants fled from before it, and Pharaoh hid himself beneath his throne. And the fear it caused him gave him, this is kind of funny. And the fear it caused him gave him bowel complaint for a week. Now before this, Pharaoh was only moved once a week, and this was the occasion of his being lifted up with pride and giving himself out to be a god. Pharaoh cried out from under the throne, "O Moses, take hold of the serpent, and I will do what you desire." Moses took hold of the serpent, and it became a rod in his hand. And then Pharaoh crawled out from under his throne and sat down upon it, and Moses put his hand into his bosom, and when he withdrew it forth, it shone like the moon. The king sent for his magicians, and the chief of these were Jannes and Jambres. He told them what Moses had done, and they said, "We can turn 1,000 rods into serpents." And then the king named a day when Moses and Aaron on one side should strive with Jannes and Jambres, and all the magicians on the other. And he gave them a mouth to prepare for the contest on the day appointed. It was Pharaoh's birthday. All the inhabitants of Memphis were assembled in a great plain outside the city, where lists were staked out, and the royal tent was spread for the king to view the contest. Moses and Aaron stood on one side and the magicians on the other. The latter said, "Shall we cast our rods, or will you?" Moses answered, "Do you cast your rods first." Then the magicians threw down 100 ass loads of rods, tied the rods together with cords, and by their enchantment caused them to appear to the spectators like serpents, leaping and darting forth from one side of the arena to the other. And all the people were filled with fear, and the magicians said, "We have this day triumphed over Moses." Then the prophet of God cast his rod before Pharaoh, and it became a mighty serpent. It rolled its tail round the throne of the king, and it shot forth its head and swallowed all the rods of the enchanters, so that there remained not one. After that, all had disappeared. Moses took the serpent, and it became a rod in his hand again. But all the rods of the magicians had vanished. And when the magicians saw the miracles that Moses had wrought, they were converted and worshiped the true God. But Pharaoh cut off their hands and feet and crucified them, and they died. Pharaoh's own daughter, Mashita, believed in the king, and his rage did not spare her, but cast her into a fire, and she was burnt. Bithia was also denounced to him, and she was condemned to the flames. But the angel Gabriel delivered her. And then Moses and Aaron met Pharaoh in the morning, and he went by the side of the river. And Moses said to the king, "The Lord of the Hebrews has sent me unto thee, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh would not hearken to him. And then Aaron stretched out his rod over the river, and it became blood. All the water that was in the vessels also became blood. Even the spittle that was in the mouth of the Egyptians. Rabbi Levi said that by this means the Israelites realized large fortunes. For if an Israelite and an Egyptian went together to the Nile to fetch water, the vessel of the Egyptian was found to contain blood, but that of the Israelite was pure water. But if an Israelite brought water to the house of an Egyptian and sold it, it remained water. But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and 7 days passed after that the Lord had smitten the river. And then went Moses and Aaron to him. But the 400 doors of the palace were guarded by bears, lions, and other savage beasts, so that none might pass till they were satisfied with flesh. But Moses and Aaron came up, collected them together, drew a circle around them with the sacred staff, and the wild beasts licked the feet of the prophets and followed them into the presence of Pharaoh. Now, remember, I had read earlier, and not in this show, but previously, about how the angels in the Targum is said that the angels had led the clean and unclean animals to Noah for him to collect them and to house them on the ark. But Noah, wearing the garments of power, he was able to keep them docile and to keep them maintained over the course of a year where they would not eat each other, chase each other, or try to kill one another, but being docile, they would eat the same food. And they would not cause a ruckus, which, should be near impossible, but yet the garments of power are imbued with such power that it is said that they hold influence of not only over the animals in keeping them docile, but they influence humans, and give them the favor of those individuals. Which I'll try to finish this one last. Moses and Aaron repeated this message to Pharaoh, but he would not hearken to them, but drove them from his presence. Aaron smote the river, but Moses on no occasion smote the Nile, for he respected the river which had saved his life as a babe. Then the Lord brought frogs upon the land and filled all the houses. They were in the beds, on the tables, and the cups. And the king sent forth Moses and said, Entreat the Lord that they may take the frogs from me and from my people. So the Lord sent a great rain, and it washed the frogs into the Red Sea. The next plague was lice. The fourth plague was wild beasts. The fifth was murrain. And the sixth was boils and blains upon man and beast. The seventh was hail and tempest. Now Job regarded the word of Moses, and he brought his cattle within doors, and they were saved. But Balaam regarded it not, and all his cattle were destroyed. The 8th was locusts. These the Egyptians fried and laid by and stored to serve them for food. But when the west wind came to blow the locusts away, it blew away also those that had been pickled and laid by for future consumption. The 9th plague was darkness. The 10th was the death of the firstborn. The legends of the patriarchs and the prophets, chapter 32, verses 4 through 6. All right, we'll be right back for second hour, everyone.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures. Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
Which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Did celebrate Passover this evening. The Feast of Unleavened Bread was, excuse me, a continuation of the Passover feast, and so, there's no problem. And I know that the Most High is just happy that those of you that did acknowledge Passover this year, and many of you did send that this was your first Passover celebration. Yeah, I think that the Father appreciates that people are attempting and that are recognizing the importance of Passover in its connections also to not only salvation through Christ, but how it is that the lamb that was sacrificed without spot or blemish, and that the blood that marked the doorpost in the symbol of the cross, the Hebrew tah, that it is the blood of the lamb which preserved the Israelites from the judgment of the angel of death in striking down their firstborn, and that it will be the blood of Christ and is the blood of Christ as the true Passover lamb that preserves us from the authority of death and of the consequences of a death which then is ultimate oblivion or ultimate annihilation. But again, because we are redeemed through Christ, and we, as the sons of God, blessed in the manner that we are, that we are allowed the privilege of an eternity, a forevermore with Him. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And to think that the watchers and the rebel angels, that they gave up the blessings of immortality for the temporary pleasures to take wives of all which they chose, and to indulge in the carnal aspects of this world. I mean, that is the height of ignorance, in my opinion. And why any creature, understanding the profundity of immortality, I mean, that's the holy grail. That's the thing that even the Knights of the Round Table and so many and all throughout life, people have sought the secret. This is the true philosopher's stone, not in converting base metals into gold, but in being able to live forever. And we are given that gift through the Most High God just by believing on and understanding what He did, and that He redeemed us in such manner that, taking on flesh Himself, He entered into this fallen world and in a fallen state of being, and subjected Himself to the perils and to the punishment and the anger and the ridicule, the condemnation of the powers and the principalities, the authorities over this world that given temporary reign, they are trying to influence and to lead us astray in such way that we join them in the judgment that reserved for them. They have awaiting them what is the consequences of their actions and the second death. That how sobering a thought that the fallen angels, the fallen ones, know that annihilation awaits them for their rebellion, for their allegiance to evil, and for their wanting to be the Most High themselves, not wanting to serve, but to be as God themselves. How unfortunate for them. But, that is the choice that they made. They had free will in the same manner that we had. And their choice was to attempt to overthrow the sun and to take his position, to divert worship to themselves. Was it worth it? In a lot of the books, like the Revelation of St. John the Theologian, at the very end, Satan, all the principalities, the powers, they accuse him, and they are lamenting at having lost their station with the Most High God, of having lost their favor, and knowing that, their time is almost up. They are finally concerned. And they're like, woe is me. Because even though they thought their time would never catch up to them, here they are with judgment coming upon them. And there's no place to run, no place to hide. And they are afraid. I was looking for that one passage. Oh, here it is. And this is, again, the Revelation of St. John the Theologian. Then we'll continue with the story. And then the worker of iniquity with his servants shall behold it. Well, let me go back one passage so you can see the context. And again I said, Lord, and after that, what wilt thou do? And I heard a voice saying to me, Hear, righteous John, then shall the earth be cleansed from sin, and all the earth shall be filled with a sweet smell, because I am about to come down upon the earth, and then shall come forth the great and venerable scepter with thousands of angels worshipping it. And as I said before, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man from the heaven with power and great glory. And then the worker of iniquity with his servants shall behold it, and gnash his teeth exceedingly, and all the unclean spirits shall be turned to flight, and then seized by invisible power, having no means of flight, they shall gnash their teeth against him, saying to him, Where is thy power? How hast thou led us astray? And we have fled away and have fallen away from the glory which we had beside him who was coming to judge us and the whole human race. Woe to us because he banishes us into outer darkness. So, very powerful stuff. All right, let's get back to the story of Exodus and the Passover. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with regard to the revelation of St. John the Theologian, it's one of my most favorite texts. Because you don't have to try to interpret or decipher anything. It lays out the end of days and the timeline for the narrative of how it all unfolds in simplicity, and it's a text that you can read quickly in one afternoon. And it's very sobering in that it presents an understandable view and what seems to be a very inspired opinion on how the end of days will unfold, how the resurrection, the judgment, every knee shall bow, every tongue confess, even what leads to the destruction of the earth and the heavens, the new heaven, the new Jerusalem descending from the skies. Very powerful book, so check it out. The Revelation of St. John the Theologian. You can find it easily in Google search. One of my most favorite texts. All right, continuing. God spake to Moshe, saying, Why dost thou stand here praying? Oh, this is the story of the, dividing the waters. God spake to Moses, saying, Why dost thou stand here praying? My children's prayer has anticipated thine. For thee there is naught to do but lift up thy rod, and stretch it out thine hand over the sea, and divide it. Moses replied, Thou commandest me to divide the sea, and lay bare the dry ground in the midst of it, and yet thou didst thyself make it a perpetual decree that the sand shall be placed for the bound of the sea? And again God spake to Moses, Thou hast not read the beginning of the Torah? Aye, yea, gather together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And at that time I made the condition that the waters shall divide before Israel. Take the rod that I gave unto thee, and go to the sea upon mine errand, and speak thus, I am the messenger sent by the Creator of the world. Uncover thy paths, O sea, for my children, that they may go through the midst of thee on dry ground. Moses spoke to the sea as God had bidden him, but it replied, I will not do according to thy words, for thou art only a man born of woman. And besides, I am 3 days older than thou, O man, for I was brought forth on the 3rd day of creation, and thou on the 6th. Moses lost no time, but carried back to God the words the sea had spoken. And the Lord said, Moses, what does a master do with an intractable servant? He beats him with a rod, said Moses. Do thus, ordered God, lift up thy rod and stretch out thy hand over the sea and divide it. Thereupon Moses raised up his rod, the rod that had been created at the very beginning of the world, on which were graven in plain letters the great and exalted name, the names of the 10 plagues inflicted upon the Egyptians, and the names of the 3 fathers and the 6 mothers, and the 12 tribes of Jacob. This rod he lifted up and stretched it over the sea. The sea, however, continued in its perseverance, and Moses entreated God to give his command direct to it. But God refused, saying, "Were I to command the sea to divide, it would never again return to its former estate. Therefore do thou convey my order to it, that it be not drained dry forever. But I will let a semblance of my strength accompany thee, and that will compel its obedience." When the sea saw the strength of God at the right hand of Moses, it spake to the earth, saying, "Make hollow places for me, that I may hide myself therein before the Lord of all created things. Blessed be he." Noticing the terror of the sea, Moses said to it, "For a whole day I spoke to thee at the bidding of the Holy One, who desired thee to divide, but thou didst refuse to pay heed to my words. Even when I showed thee my rod, thou didst remain obdurate. What hath happened now that thou skippest hence?" The sea replied, "I am fleeing, not before thee, but before the Lord of all created things, that his name be magnified in all the earth." And the waters of the Red Sea divided, and not they alone, but all the waters in heaven and on earth, in whatever vessel it was, in cisterns and wells, in caves and casks and pitchers and drinking cups and in glasses, and none of these waters returned to their former estate until Israel had passed through the sea on dry land. It's the Legends of the Jews, Book 3. Okay. All right, now we'll move on into the story of the split rock. It was this story that actually caused um, Moses to lose his favor and his privilege to enter into the covenant land and to be the leader which leads Israel against the giants of Canaan. And I think we can do this story, and then we will do the story of how the rod was also instrumental in the stemming the tide of war against the Amalekites, the giants Sihon and Og, and the battle of not only these antediluvian titans, but also the giants that had occupied the land of Canaan, and which were so numerous now that they had become so formidable, they had taken over. Even Og was said to be king over 60 cities in the land of Bashan, in the area of that region. Okay. Here's the story of the split rock. And then God bade him go with some elders to the rock on Horeb and fetch water out of it. The elders were to accompany him there, that they might be convinced that he was not bringing water from a well, but smiting it from a rock. To accomplish this miracle, God bade him smite the rock with the rod as the people labored under the impression that this rod could only bring destruction. For through its agency Moses had brought the 10 plagues upon the Egyptians in Egypt and at the Red Sea. Now they were to see that it could work good also. Upon God's bidding, Moses told the people to choose from which rock they wished water to flow. And hardly had Moses touched with his sapphire rod the rock which they had chosen. And when plenteous water flowed from it, the spot where this occurred, God called Massah and Meribah, because Israel had there tried their God, saying, if God is Lord over all, as over us, if he satisfies our needs and will further show us that he knows our thoughts, then we will serve him, but not otherwise. The water that flowed for them on this spot served not only as a relief for their present need, but on this occasion there was revealed to them a well of water which did not abandon them in all their 40 years of wandering, but accompanied them on all their marches. God wrought this great miracle for the merits of the prophetess Miriam. Wherefore also it was called Miriam's well. But his well dates back to the beginning of the world, for God created it on the second day of the creation. And at one time it was in the possession of Abraham. It was the same well that Abraham demanded back from Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, after the king's servant had violently taken it away. But when Abimelech pretended not to know anything about it, saying, I wot not who hath done this thing, Abraham said, thou and I will send sheep to the well, and he shall be declared the rightful owner of the well, for whose sheep the water will spout forth to water them. And continued Abraham, from that same well shall the 7th generation after me, the wanderers in the desert, draw their supply. And so this well and this water that came forth from the split rock is the very same well that Eleazar was sent to bring forth Rebekah as a bride for Isaac, and of which Jacob met Rachel, and of which Moshe would later meet Zipporah, his wife. And so it's fascinating. The account of even this well is interesting incorporation to the story of the staff and the garments. And I think it's cool that the Most High speaks about their, prophetically being important in the life of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, and also to what is the prophetic establishment of the Israelites as a people chosen unto God. Definitely not just, well, something supernaturally appointed, divine providence, was established, even behind the story of this well. So continue. This well was in the shape of a sieve-like rock, out of which water gushes forth as from a spout. It followed them on all their wanderings uphill and down dale, and wherever they halted, it halted too. And it settled opposite the tabernacle. Thereupon the leaders of the 12 tribes would appear, each with his staff, and chant these words to the well. Spring up, O well, sing ye unto it, nobles of the people. Digged it by the direction of the lawgiver with their staves. Then the water would gush forth from the depth of the well and shoot up high as pillars. And then discharge itself into great streams that were navigable. And on these rivers the Jews sailed to the ocean and hauled all the treasures of the world therefrom. Legends of the Jews, Book 4. And so, even the story of the split rock in the well, that it was this same water which had come forth to save Ishmael. And that served as a boundary between Lot and Abraham, and also Laban and Jacob. All right, I'll read one more in-depth story about this. And then how it led to judgment. Because Moses was ordered to command water be brought, that the rock release the water rather than striking it. And even though this seems kind of trivial, it cost him being able to enter into the promised land. And one wonders why the consequences of such would affect him and be allowed, because it seemed like, God was pleased with Moses. But this story tells a different perspective. Throughout 40 years, Moses had striven to refrain from harshly addressing the people, knowing that if but a single time he lost patience, God would cause him to die in the desert. And, this was really the real reason, because Moses lost his patience, that, God made an example and a lesson of this occasion. On this occasion, however, he was mastered by his rage and shouted at Israel the words, "O ye madmen, ye stiff-necked ones, that desire to teach their teacher, ye that shoot upon your leaders with your arrows, do ye think that out of this rock that ye have chosen we shall be able to bring forth water? I vow that I shall let the water flow out of the rock only that I have chosen." He addressed these harsh words not to a few among Israel, but to all the people, for God had brought the miracle to pass, that the small space in front of the rock held all Israel. Carried away by anger, Moses still further forgot himself, and instead of speaking to the rock as God had commanded him, he struck a rock chosen by himself. As Moses had not acted according to God's command, the rock did not at once obey, and sent forth only a few drops of water, so that the mockers cried, Son of Amram, is this for the sucklings and for them that are weaned from the milk? Moses now waxed angrier still, and for a second time smote the rock, from which gushed streams so mighty that many of his enemies met their death in the currents. And at the same time water poured out of all the stones in the rocks of the desert. God hereupon said to Moses, Thou and Aaron believed me not. I forbade you to smite the rock, but thou didst smite it. Ye sanctified me not in the eyes of the children of Israel, because ye did not fetch water out of any one of the rocks, as the people wished. Ye trespassed against me when ye said, Shall we bring forth water out of this rock? And ye acted contrary to my command, because ye did not speak to the rock as I had bidden ye. I vow, therefore, that ye shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. And not until the Messianic time shall ye two lead Israel to the Holy Land. Interesting, huh? That here the Most High is speaking about the return of the Messiah. God furthermore said to Moses, Thou shouldst have learned from the life of Ishmael to have greater faith in me. I bade the well to spring up for him, even though he was only a single human being, on account of the merits of his father Abraham. How much more than hadst thou a right to expect, thou who couldst refer to the merits of the three patriarchs, as well as to the people's own? For they accepted the Torah and obeyed many commandments. Yea, even from thy own experience shouldst thou have drawn greater faith in my will to aid Israel. When in Rephidim thou didst say to me, They be almost ready to stone me, did not I reply to thee, Why dost thou accuse my children? God, with thy rod before the people, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it. If I wrought for them miracles such as these when they had not yet accepted the Torah, and did not yet have faith in me, shouldst thou not have known how much I would do for them now? God taketh the wise in their own craftiness. He has long before this decreed that Moses die in the desert, and Moses' offense in Kadesh was only a pretext God employed that he might not seem to be unjust. But he gave to Moses himself the true reason why he did not permit him to enter the promised land, saying, Would it perchance redound to thy glory if thou wert to lead into the land a new generation, after thou hadst led out of Egypt the 60 in myriads and buried them in the desert? People would declare that the generation of the desert has no share in future world. Therefore, Stay with them, that at their head thou mayest, after the resurrection, enter the promised land. Moses now said to God, Thou hast decreed that I die in the desert like the generation of the desert that angered thee. I implore thee, write in thy Torah wherefore I have been thus punished, that future generations may not say I had been like the generations of the desert. God granted this wish, and in several passages of the scriptures set forth what had really been the offense on account of which Moses had been prohibited from entering the promised land. It was due only to the transgression at the rock in Kadesh where Moses failed to sanctify God in the eyes of the children of Israel, and God was sanctified by allowing justice to take its course without respect to persons, and punishing Moses. Hence, this place was called Kadesh, sanctity, and En Misfat, the fountain of justice. Because on this spot judgment was passed upon Moses, and by this sentence God's name was sanctified. As water had been the occasion for the punishment of Moses, God did not say that that which he had created on the second day of the creation was good. For on that day he had created water, and that which brought about Moses' death was not good. If the death doomed for Moses upon this occasion was a very severe punishment, entirely out of proportion to his offense, then still more so was the death destined for Aaron at the same time, for he had been guilty of no other offense than that of joining Moses at his transgression. And who so joins a transgressor is as bad as the transgressor himself. On this occasion, as usual, Aaron showed his absolute devotion and his faith in God's justice. He might have said, I have not sinned, why am I to be punished? But he conquered himself and put up no defense, wherefore Moses greatly praised him. Aaron died 4 months after the death of his sister Miriam, whereas Moses died nearly a year after his sister. Her death took place on the first day of Nisan, and that of Moses on the 7th day of Adar, in the same year. Although the death of these three did not take place in the same month, God spoke of them, saying, And I cut off the 3 shepherds in 1 month. For he had determined upon their death in 1 month. It is God's way to classify people into related groups. And the death of these 3 people, these 3 pious ones, was not determined upon together with that of the sinful generation of wanderers in the desert, but only after this generation had died was sealed the doom of the 3. Miriam died first, and the same fate was decreed for her brothers as a consequence of her death. Miriam's death plunged all into deep mourning. Moses and Aaron wept in their apartments, and the people wept in the streets. For 6 hours Moses was ignorant of the disappearance of Miriam's well. With Miriam's death, until the Israelites went to him, saying, How long wilt thou sit here and weep? He answered, Shall I not weep for my sister who had died? They replied, While thou art weeping for one soul, weep at the same time for us as well. Why? Asked he. They said, we have no water to drink. And then he rose up from the ground, went out and saw the well without a drop of water. He now began to quarrel with them, saying, have I not told ye? I am not able to bear ye myself alone. Ye have rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens, princes, chiefs, elders, and magnates. Let these attend to your needs. Israel, however, said, all rest with thee, for it is thou who didst lead out of Egypt and brought us in unto this evil place. It is no place of seed or of figs or of vines or of pomegranates. Neither is there any water to drink. If thou wilt give us water, it is well. If not, we shall stone thee. And when Moses heard this, he fled from them and betook himself to the tabernacle. There God said to him, what ails thee? And Moses replied, O Lord of the world, thy children want to stone me. And had I not escaped, they would have stoned me by now. God said, Moses, how much longer wilt thou continue to calumniate my children? Is it not enough that at Horeb thou didst say, they be ready to stone me? Whereupon I answered thee, go up before them, and I will see whether they stone thee or not. Take the rod and assemble thy congregation, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, that it give forth its water. Moses now went to seek for the rock, followed by all Israel, for he did not know which was the rock out of which God had said water was to flow. For the rock out of which Miriam's well flowed vanished among the rest of the rocks in such a way that Moses was not able to distinguish it among the number. On the way they saw a rock that dripped, and they took up their places in front of it. When Moses saw that the people stood still, he turned around, and they said to him, how long wilt thou lead us on, Moses, until I fetch ye forth water out of the rock? The people, give us water at once, that we may drink. Moses, how long do ye quarrel? Is there a creature in all the world that so rebels against its maker as ye do? When it is certain that God will give ye water out of a rock, even though I do not know which one that may be? The people, thou wert a prophet and our shepherd during our march through the desert, and now thou sayest, I know not out of which rock God will give ye water. Moses hereupon assembled them about a rock, saying to himself, if I now speak to the rock, bidding it bring forth water, and it bring forth none, I shall subject myself to humiliation in the presence of the community. For they will say, where is thy wisdom? Hence he said to the people, ye know that God can perform miracles for ye, but he hath hidden from me out of which rock he will let the water flow forth. For whenever the time comes that God wishes a man not to know, then his wisdom and understanding are of no avail to him. Moses then lifted his rod and let it quietly slide down upon the rock which he had laid it, uttering as if addressing Israel the words, shall we bring you forth water out of this rock? The rock of its own accord now began to give forth water, whereupon Moses struck upon it with his rod, but then water no longer flowed forth, but blood. Moses hereupon said to God, this rock bring forth no water. And God instantly turned to the rock with the question, why dost thou bring forth not water, but blood? The rock answered, O Lord of the world, Why did Moses smite me? When God asked Moses why he had smitten the rock, he replied, that it might bring forth water. God, however, said to Moses, had I bidden thee to smite the rock? I had only said, speak to it. Moses tried to defend himself by saying, I did speak to it, but it brought forth nothing. Thou, God replied, hast given Israel the instruction, in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. Why then didst thou not judge the rock in righteousness? The rock that in Egypt supported thee when out of it thou didst such honey? Is this the manner in which thou repayest it? Not only wert thou unjust to the rock, but thou didst also call my children fools. If then thou art a wise man, it does not become thee as a wise man to have anything further to do with fools, and therefore thou shalt not with them learn to know the land of Israel. At the same time, God added, neither thou nor thy brother nor thy sister shall set foot upon the land of Israel. For even in Egypt, God had warned Moses and Aaron to refrain from calling the Israelites fools. And as Moses, without evoking a protest from Aaron at the water of Kadesh, called them fools, the punishment of death was decreed for him and his brother. And when God had informed Moses of the impending punishment due to him and his brother, he turned to this rock, saying, turn thy blood into water. And so it came to pass. The Legends of the Jews, Book 4. All right, I think I have time to cover the story of the Israelites' battle with Amalek. And I'm just going to read it from the Exodus. And this is the account also of the rod and how it played a part in the battle against the giants. And it's, it's something that one can really overlook when you don't understand that the rod was imbued with a supernatural power and divine providence. But when you understand all the other things that I brought forth in connection to it and its use, how it was even prophetically inscribed with, what would be the plagues and what would be the how it would be utilized in the Exodus. I mean, again, it shows that God knew the end from the beginning and had ordained it, even inscribed it upon this, what was a limb from the tree of life. Which again, the story of the legend of these sacred relics is amazing when you see the fullness and the extent of how it played such an important role in so many episodes. All right, so I'm going to read this really quickly. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under. And he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, and the one on the one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. And for he said, because the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And so that's the Exodus chapter 17. But again, it shows a story about how even the war against the giants was connected to Moses' ability to command the staff and to show how authority had been given to him by God in wielding what was this supernatural artifact. And so it's another one of those accounts that is contained in the Vestures of Light and the Rod of Wonder, which just wanted to remind all of you that tonight I will be on with Rob Schema, and we should be able to get into the early chapters of what is the book On the Courses of the Heavenly Luminaries. When we get to that, it's going to be really incredible because I have so much information I want to show all of you. I mean, those of you that have followed my work and are familiar with it, you know that my 9th book, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, it is dedicated to those 14 chapters on the book On the Courses of the Heavenly Luminary. And that it was in the study of that material that the Most High led me to revelation on the calendar, on the biblical cosmology, on the movement of the sun, the moon, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury, and that the Earth is fixed and still and without curvature and motionless, and it's the other luminaries which move in circle around Polaris, and not that they are circling around the sun, because all that is not in anywhere based on reality. The tabernacle of the planets, which the sun is included as being one, they move around Polaris. And so I'm really excited to get into all of this material and to be able to share with you. There's just so much information. Even, the connections of how to honor Sabbath, the 2 calendars, the one connected to the great luminary, which is the sun, and then the other, which is connected to the lesser luminary, the moon. All of that is found within those chapters. And so it should be a good time. I thank all of you again for joining us this evening. We'll be on midnight to 2 a.m. I know it's going to be a long night, but I do hope that you will be able to join us. And I'm sure we'll be talking about and reminiscent on the observance of Passover as well. And then don't forget, tomorrow night, I'll be bringing you the story of Passover from the Coleman Bible. God bless all. Good night.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.